Soustra, London, October 1885. Eleanor Hartwell had learned to carry shame like a second skin. It clung to her as she moved through the servants' corridor of the Whitmore residence, invisible yet suffocating. At 26, she was too old to be unmarried, too proud to beg and too indebted to escape. The sound of heavy footsteps on the main staircase made her pause. Mrs. Whitmore's shrill voice echoed through the hallway. "I don't care who you are. This is a respectable household." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She knew that tone. She'd heard it before in 3 other positions she'd lost this year. She rounded the corner to find her worst nightmare materialized in the grand foyer. Mr. Cornelius Blackwood stood flanked by 2 men whose scarred faces suggested they enjoyed their work far too much. Her employer, Mrs. Whitmore, clutched her pearl necklace as if it might be torn from her throat at any moment. "Miss Hartwell," Blackwood drawled, his voice smooth as oil and twice as slippery. "How convenient. I was just explaining to your employer the delicate nature of your situation." Eleanor's hands trembled, but she forced them still. She'd learned that showing fear only made men like Blackwood hungrier. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat, "this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion." "On the contrary, Miss Hartwell, I believe it's precisely the time." He produced a leather portfolio, extracting papers with deliberate slowness. "Your father's debts total £2,000, with interest accumulated over the past 18 months since his unfortunate demise. The amount now stands at £2,400. Mrs. Whitmore gasped. £2,000! Eleanor, is this true? The use of her Christian name, after 6 months of Miss Hartwell, told Eleanor everything she needed to know about her continued employment. "My father was ill," Eleanor said quietly, meeting Blackwood's eyes with all the dignity she could muster. "He wasn't himself. The gambling was his choice," Blackwood interrupted, stepping closer. Too close. She could smell the pomade in his hair, sweet and cloying. "As is your choice now. I'm a reasonable man, Miss Hartwell. I don't expect immediate payment." His smile made her skin crawl. "I could offer you alternative arrangements. A woman of your age and circumstances might find it advantageous to have a protector, someone to manage your financial burdens in exchange for companionship." The room fell silent. Even Mrs. Whitmore's scandalized breathing seemed to pause. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from rage so pure it burned. Her father had gambled away their dignity, but she'd be damned if she'd sell what remained of herself to this vulture. "I would rather starve," she said, each word precise and cold. Blackwood's expression hardened. "Then starve you shall. I've been patient, Miss Hartwell, but my patience has limits. You have 1 week to produce payment in full, or I'll seize what assets remain. That includes your sister's school fees. I believe Miss Clara Hartwell is quite enjoying her education. It would be a shame for her to find herself in an orphanage." The threat landed like a physical blow. Clara. Sweet, brilliant Clara, who deserved so much more than the hand fate had dealt them. "Get out," Mrs. Whitmore said suddenly, her voice shaking. "Miss Hartwell, collect your things. I cannot have this scandal in my home. You're dismissed. Immediately." Eleanor barely heard her. Her vision tunneled, focusing on Blackwood's satisfied smirk as he tipped his hat and departed, his thugs trailing behind like loyal hounds. 3 hours later, Eleanor sat in the cramped office of Mr. Peters, a solicitor whose fees she couldn't afford, but who'd agreed to see her out of pity. Rain drummed against the grimy window, matching the rhythm of her racing heart. "I'm afraid there's no legal recourse, Miss Hartwell," Mr. Peters said, his jowled face sympathetic but resigned. "Your father signed these debts. They're legitimate. Without means to pay, the court would rule in Blackwood's favour, your sister, being a minor without guardian able to provide for her, would be made a ward of the state, Eleanor finished, her voice hollow. I understand. She'd known the answer before coming, but desperation made people cling to impossible hopes. A knock on the door made both of them look up. Mr. Peters frowned. I'm with a client, he called out. The door opened anyway. A man stepped inside, and Eleanor's first thought was that he looked tired. Not the exhaustion of a sleepless night, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd carried burdens too long. He was tall, dark-haired, and perhaps in his early 30s. His clothes were well made but understated, the attire of a successful tradesman rather than aristocracy. His eyes, grey as the rain-soaked sky outside, swept over the office before settling on her with unsettling intensity. Forgive the intrusion, he said, his voice low and measured. I'm Thomas Ashford. I believe you're Mr. Peters? The solicitor stood, confusion evident. I am, but I don't believe we have an appointment, Mr. Ashford. We don't. Thomas' gaze remained on Eleanor. She felt exposed under that stare, as if he could see every shameful secret, every desperate thought. But I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. The walls here are rather thin? Eleanor's cheeks burned. Of course. Her humiliation was now complete, witnessed by strangers. I have a proposition, Thomas continued, addressing her directly now. I'm in need of a wife. The room fell silent except for the rain. Eleanor blinked. I beg your pardon? A wife, he repeated, his expression unreadable. I'm a widower. My business interests require a certain respectability, social obligations that a bachelor cannot easily fulfill. You need immediate financial relief. I propose a solution mutually beneficial. Mr. Peters sputtered. Mr. Ashford, this is highly irregular. It's practical, Thomas interrupted, still watching Eleanor. Miss Hartwell, I would pay your debts in full immediately upon our marriage. Your sister would continue her education without interruption. In return, you would manage my household and accompany me to necessary social functions. It would be a marriage of convenience, nothing more. Mutual respect and separate accommodations, if you prefer. Eleanor's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Men didn't simply walk into solicitors' offices and propose marriage to desperate women they'd never met. Except, apparently, this one did. Why me? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. You don't know anything about me. I know you refused to become that man's mistress despite impossible circumstances, Thomas said quietly. I know you're willing to seek legal advice rather than surrender. I know you put your sister's welfare above your own pride. Those qualities are rare, Miss Hartwell. Far rarer than beauty or dowry. Something flickered in his eyes there and gone too quickly to identify. Pain, perhaps. Or recognition. And what do you gain? Eleanor pressed, because she'd learned that nothing in life came without cost. Truly. Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an honesty that surprised her. Freedom from being hunted for my prospects. Every unmarried woman of my acquaintance sees only my business success. They want security, status. You, Miss Hartwell, didn't even ask my occupation before rejecting my offer. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's refreshing. Eleanor looked at Mr. Peters, who appeared torn between professional duty and personal shock. Then she looked at Thomas Ashford, this stranger who'd just offered her a lifeline made of legal contracts and pragmatic arrangements. She thought of Clara, bright-eyed and hopeful. She thought of Blackwood's leering smile. She thought of the suffocating weight of debts she'd never incurred, but would die carrying. I have conditions, she said finally. Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. Name them. I will be an honest wife, Mr. Ashford. I won't lie, cheat, or bring shame to your name. I'll manage your household with diligence and accompany you as required. But I won't be treated as property or less than human. Respect must be mutual, or the arrangement fails. Agreed, he said without hesitation. And Clara must never know the true nature of this marriage, Eleanor continued, her voice firm despite the surreal nature of this conversation. She's been through enough. She deserves to believe in something good. Your sister will know only that you married a man who values you, Thomas said softly. Which, Miss Hartwell, isn't entirely false. Eleanor studied his face, searching for deception and finding only exhaustion that mirrored her own. They were both, she realised, desperate in their own ways, both seeking escape from different prisons. Then I accept Mr. Ashford. His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. We'll marry within the week. Mr. Peters can draft the settlement. Your debts will be cleared by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Eleanor breathed. I see no reason to delay. Thomas extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Hartwell? Eleanor looked at his hand, callous despite his claim of being a tradesman. Working hands, honest hands, perhaps. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, steady. We have an agreement, Mr. Ashford. As their hands clasped, Eleanor felt the strangest sensation, as if she'd just stepped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. Or perhaps she was simply falling and hadn't hit the ground yet. Time would tell which. The wedding took place 5 days later, in a small church whose pews had seen better decades. Rain pattered against the stained glass windows, casting watery coloured shadows across the stone floor. Eleanor wore a dove grey dress she'd owned for years, practical and unremarkable. White felt like a lie she wasn't willing to tell. Clara stood beside her, tears streaming down her 18-year-old face. Happy tears, Eleanor reminded herself. Her sister didn't know this was theatre, carefully staged for financial survival. Dearly beloved, the elderly vicar began, his voice wavering with age or perhaps the chill in the unheated church. Eleanor barely heard the words. She focused instead on Thomas, who stood beside her in a dark suit that emphasised his broad shoulders. He'd been nothing but courteous these past days, handling every detail with quiet efficiency. The debts paid. Clara's school fees secured for 3 years. A household ready to receive its new mistress. It was all too perfect, too easy. Eleanor kept waiting for the trap to spring. Do you, Thomas Edward Ashford, take this woman? Thomas's response was clear and steady. I do. The vicar turned to Eleanor. In that moment, meeting Thomas's grey eyes, she felt a flutter of something she couldn't name. Fear? Hope? The terrifying possibility that this gamble might actually work. I do, she whispered. The ring slid onto her finger, a simple gold band that fit perfectly. Thomas's fingers trembled slightly as he released her hand. Such a small gesture, yet it made him suddenly human rather than the efficient stranger who'd appeared in that solicitor's office. You may kiss the bride. Eleanor's heart stuttered. They hadn't discussed this. Thomas leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. His lips brushed hers, gentle and brief, tasting of tea and something she couldn't identify. The touch lasted perhaps 2 seconds, yet Eleanor felt it down to her bones. When he pulled back, his eyes held a question. She nodded slightly, not trusting her voice. I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Ashford, the vicar announced to their audience of 3. Clara, Mr. Peters and the church warden, who'd served as second witness. Mrs. Thomas Ashford, Eleanor Ashford. The name felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd only read in books. Clara hugged her fiercely. "Oh, Ellie, I'm so happy for you. He seems wonderful, truly, and so handsome." Eleanor managed a smile. "Yes, I'm very fortunate." The words felt true and false simultaneously. Fortunate to escape Blackwood, yes. Fortunate to trap herself in a marriage of convenience with a stranger? That remained to be seen. Thomas's carriage awaited outside, sleek and well-appointed. Another detail that didn't quite match his claim of being a simple tradesman. Eleanor filed the observation away. The house Thomas brought her to was in Mayfair, elegant but not ostentatious. 3 stories of cream-coloured stone, windows gleaming with cleanliness, a small but manicured front garden. Eleanor had expected modest. This was decidedly not modest. "I thought you said you were a tradesman," she said as the carriage stopped. Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I said I had business interests. Trade is one aspect. This house suggests rather successful business interests. I've been fortunate." His tone discouraged further questioning. Eleanor decided not to press. Not yet. She had a lifetime to unravel her husband's secrets. The door opened before Thomas could reach it. A plump woman in her 50s appeared, her face creasing with such unguarded joy that Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Mr. Ashford! Oh, it's so wonderful to see you. And this must be the new Mrs. Ashford. Welcome, my dear, welcome." The woman seized Eleanor's hands, squeezing with surprising strength. "I'm Mrs. Pemberton, housekeeper. I've been with the family for, such a long time. Couldn't be more thrilled about this marriage, truly." The effusive greeting felt excessive for greeting her employer's new wife. Eleanor glanced at Thomas, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Pemberton has been managing the household," he said quickly. "She'll help you learn the routine." "Learn the routine?" Mrs. Pemberton laughed. "Oh, Mr. Ashford, I'm sure Mrs. Ashford will bring her own style. The house could use a woman's touch. It's been too long indeed." She ushered them inside with the energy of a woman half her age. The entrance hall was lovely, all warm wood and soft lighting. Not palatial, but decidedly upper-middle-class prosperity. Possibly higher. "I'll give you the tour," Mrs. Pemberton announced. "Mr. Ashford, you must be exhausted. Shall I bring tea to the drawing-room after?" "That would be lovely, Mrs. Pemberton. Thank you." The housekeeper practically bounced toward the stairs. Eleanor followed, her mind cataloguing every detail. The quality of the carpets, the artwork, original pieces, not copies, the fresh flowers in every room despite autumn's chill. Thomas Ashford was either a spectacularly successful tradesman or something else entirely. They reached the main floor drawing room, and Mrs. Pemberton gestured proudly to the space. "Your predecessor decorated this room?" she said to Thomas, then seemed to realise her mistake. "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't mention—" "It's fine," Thomas said quietly. "Eleanor knows I was married before." Of course. Mrs. Pemberton recovered quickly. "Well, Mrs. Ashford, please feel free to change anything you'd like. Make it your own." After Mrs. Pemberton departed for tea, Eleanor turned to Thomas. "She seems very fond of you." "Mrs. Pemberton has been with my family for many years," Thomas said carefully. "She's somewhat overly familiar, but her heart is kind." "Your family. The tradesman family." Eleanor kept her tone neutral. Thomas met her gaze. "We should discuss boundaries. What rooms you prefer, how much independence you require. I travel frequently for business. You'll often have the house to yourself." "How convenient," Eleanor murmured. Then, more loudly, "Where's the kitchen?" He blinked. "The kitchen?" "Yes, kitchens. Where food is prepared." Downstairs, I believe. Mrs. Pemberton would know better." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You believe?" You don't know where your own kitchen is? I don't spend much time in kitchens, Thomas said defensively. Clearly. She tried not to smile, failed. For a tradesman, you seem remarkably unfamiliar with your own home, Mr. Ashford. A flush crept up his neck. I travel frequently. So, you've mentioned. Their eyes met, and something sparked between them. Amusement, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding that they were both playing roles, both hiding truths. Mrs. Pemberton returned with tea, breaking the moment. But as Eleanor sipped from delicate china that probably cost more than she'd earned in a month, she found herself wondering exactly who she'd married, and why the mystery didn't frighten her as much as it should. The first week of marriage established a rhythm that felt surreal in its normalcy. Thomas left early each morning for business, returning in the evenings. They dined together, conversations polite and carefully neutral. He asked about her day. She asked about his work. He gave vague answers. She didn't push. Yet. Clara visited on the third day, wide-eyed at the house's elegance. Ellie, this is magnificent. Your husband must be incredibly successful. He does well enough, Eleanor said carefully. Does well enough. He's clearly wealthy. Oh, I'm so relieved you found someone who can care for you properly. You deserve happiness after everything. Guilt twisted in Eleanor's stomach. Clara's joy was genuine, built on the lie that this was a love match. Thomas appeared then, having returned early from his office. He greeted Clara warmly, asking about her studies with genuine interest. When she mentioned struggling with mathematics, he offered to hire a tutor. Oh, I couldn't impose, Clara protested. It's no imposition, Thomas said firmly. Education is never an imposition. I'll arrange it this week. After Clara left, practically floating with happiness, Eleanor confronted Thomas in the library where he'd retreated. You didn't have to do that, she said. He looked up from his papers. Do what? Offer the tutor. The arrangement was her school fees, nothing more. She's your sister. Her happiness affects yours. He returned to his reading. Besides, it's only money. Only money. The casual dismissal spoke volumes about exactly how much money Thomas Ashford actually possessed. Eleanor studied him in the lamplight. His hair fell across his forehead as he read, his expression focused. He had elegant hands, long fingers that moved across the page with practiced ease. Aristocratic hands, she thought, then dismissed the idea as paranoia. Why did you really marry me? She asked suddenly. Thomas's hand stilled. He looked up, his grey eyes unreadable. I told you. Convenience. No one marries for convenience in 5 days. No one pays thousands of pounds for a stranger. Eleanor moved closer. What are you hiding, Mr. Ashford? For a long moment he said nothing. Then he set down his papers and stood, walking to the window. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the gaslight from the street. My first wife despised me, he said quietly. We married for all the wrong reasons. Status, obligation, her family's expectations. She made it very clear that I was a means to an end, nothing more. She died 3 years ago in a carriage accident while fleeing to meet her lover. Eleanor's breath caught. The pain in his voice was raw, real. I spent 3 years being the Duke of... He stopped abruptly. Being someone I wasn't, playing a role in someone else's expectations. When I saw you in that office, being propositioned by that vulture, refusing despite your desperation. He turned to face her. You had dignity, pride. You wouldn't compromise yourself even to save yourself. That's rare, Eleanor, genuinely rare. So, you married me out of admiration? She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. I married you because you didn't know who I was. Thomas said simply. And you treated me like a person, not a position. Do you know how intoxicating that is? To be seen as just Thomas, not a title or a fortune, just a man. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Eleanor didn't fully understand. He'd almost said something, almost revealed something before catching himself. What title? She asked softly. Thomas's expression shuttered. A figure of speech. I meant my business position. Liar, Eleanor said, but without heat. You're a terrible liar, Mr. Ashford. Despite himself, he smiled. Is that so? Your housekeeper treats you like aristocracy. This house screams old money. You don't know where your own kitchen is, for God's sake. She crossed her arms. But I won't press. You'll tell me when you're ready. Or not at all. The marriage contract doesn't require honesty after all. Eleanor? It's fine, she interrupted. We're both hiding truths. I married you for money. You married me for whatever reason you're not saying. At least we're equal in our deceptions. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. I'm not hiding because I want to deceive you, he said quietly. I'm hiding because I don't want you to see me differently. Eleanor looked back. Thomas stood silhouetted against the window, and, for a moment, he looked unbearably lonely. I already see you differently than you think, she said softly. You paid my debts before knowing my favourite colour. You treat my sister with kindness. You've given me a life I never imagined having. Whatever you're hiding, Mr. Ashford, I doubt it could make me see you worse than I see myself. She left him there, staring after her with an expression she couldn't read. That night, lying in her lavish bedroom that connected to Thomas's through a locked door, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Rain continued its assault on the windows. She thought about Thomas's words. His pain, his first wife who'd hated him, the duke of something he'd almost said. Impossible. Dukes didn't marry governesses out of nowhere. Dukes had succession requirements and social obligations. They certainly didn't pose as tradesmen, yet the pieces fit uncomfortably well. The house, the staff, the easy wealth, Mrs. Pemberton's excessive deference. Eleanor closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd search for answers. Tonight she'd let herself pretend this was real, that she was simply a woman married to a good man who happened to have secrets. We all have secrets, she thought. Mine is that I'm starting to care about his. The next 2 weeks brought an unexpected comfort. Thomas and Eleanor fell into a routine that felt almost domestic. Breakfasts together, reading newspapers in companionable silence, evenings by the fire in the library, Thomas working through correspondence while Eleanor read novels Clara sent her. They talked more. Small revelations traded like currency. Thomas loved architecture, she learned, could discuss the merits of Gothic versus classical design for an hour without boring her. He was surprisingly funny when he forgot to be guarded, his dry wit catching her off guard. Eleanor discovered she could make him laugh with her observations about society's absurdities. Her descriptions of previous employers' eccentricities had him choking on his brandy one evening. Lady Whitmore insisted her parrot attend dinner parties, Eleanor recounted, fighting her own laughter. She'd introduce it to guests. This is Lord Feathersby. He's from a very good family. The parrot would screech obscenities it learned from her husband. Thomas's shoulders shook with mirth. You're inventing this. I swear on my life, the bird called the vicar a bastard during tea. Lady Whitmore blamed the scullery maid. His laugh was unrestrained, boyish. It transformed his face, erasing years of care. Eleanor's heart did something complicated in her chest. When he recovered, wiping his eyes, he looked at her with warmth that made her skin tingle. I haven't laughed like that in years, he admitted. Then you've been spending time with the wrong people. Eleanor said lightly, trying to ignore how her pulse had quickened. Clearly. His gaze held hers. Thank you, Eleanor. For what? For being yourself. For not pretending to be someone you're not to please me. The irony wasn't lost on her, given his own deception, but she didn't mention it. That night marked a shift. Thomas began seeking her company, not from obligation, but choice. He'd appear in whatever room she occupied, ostensibly to discuss household matters, but lingering to talk. About books, philosophy, politics, where they argued cheerfully. Women should have the vote, Eleanor declared during one debate. I agree, Thomas said, surprising her. You do? Why wouldn't I? Half the men I know are idiots. Many women I've met display better judgment. He paused, present company being prime example. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Compliments from Thomas felt dangerous, too easy to treasure. One afternoon, Thomas taught her to play chess in the library. Rain drummed against the windows as they sat across from each other, the fire crackling. Chess is about strategy, he explained, moving his knight, anticipating your opponent's moves. Like marriage, Eleanor murmured, then regretted it when his eyes sharpened. Is that how you see this? A game. Isn't it? She moved her pawn. We're both playing roles, pretending this is something it isn't. Are we? Thomas' voice was quiet. I'm not pretending anything, Eleanor. She looked up, startled by the intensity in his gaze. Check, he said softly, though he wasn't talking about chess anymore. Eleanor's heart hammered. She moved her queen, trying to focus on the board and failing. Thomas was too close, the lamplight catching in his dark hair, his attention entirely on her. They played in silence for several moves. Then Eleanor saw her opening. Checkmate, she announced triumphantly. Thomas blinked at the board. You won. Did I cheat? She couldn't help grinning. Flagrantly. But he was smiling. Where did you learn to play? My father taught me. Before the gambling consumed him, he was quite good. Her smile faded. He taught me other things too, how to read people, how to spot a bad hand. Ironic that he couldn't see his own. Thomas reached across the board, his hand covering hers where it rested beside her captured bishop. You're not your father, Eleanor. His mistakes aren't your shame to carry. The touch sent electricity through her. His hand was warm, calloused, real. She should pull away. This was supposed to be a convenient arrangement. Nothing more. She didn't pull away. I wish I could believe that, she whispered. Then let me believe it for both of us. They sat like that, hands clasped across the chessboard, as the fire burned low and rain painted silver streaks down the darkening windows. Eleanor felt something crack inside her, some defensive wall she'd built crumbling. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to care about Thomas Ashford and his sad grey eyes and his terrible lies and his unexpected kindness. But God help her, she did. 2 days later, Thomas announced he needed to travel to Kent for business. Several days, possibly a week. There's a property I need to inspect, he explained over breakfast. I'd like you to accompany me, if you're willing. Eleanor's pulse quickened. To Kent? The countryside where I grew up? I think you'd enjoy it. Clara is welcome too, if she'd like. Clara had exams, so it would be just them, alone, in the countryside. The prospect both thrilled and terrified Eleanor. I'd like that, she said, surprised by how much she meant it. The train journey took several hours. They sat in a first-class compartment, countryside rolling past the windows. Thomas seemed more relaxed away from London, pointing out landmarks with genuine enthusiasm. I spent every summer here as a boy, he said, gesturing to green fields dotted with sheep. I preferred it to the city. Still do. Yet, you live in London. Business requires it. Something flickered across his face. Or it did. Perhaps that could change. Eleanor studied him. He wore country tweeds today, looking more comfortable than in his London suits. This was Thomas unguarded, she realised. This was who he'd be if society didn't demand otherwise. "Tell me about this property," she said. "It's old, beautiful, needs work, but good bones." His voice held affection. Stone construction, Georgian architecture, gardens that were magnificent once, could be again. "I'm considering whether it's worth investing in restoration." "You seem to know a great deal about estate management for a tradesman." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I grew up around estates." "As what, the groundskeeper's son?" "Something like that." Eleanor let it drop, but with every passing mile suspicion grew. The way other passengers deferred to Thomas. The station master's excessive courtesy. The fine carriage that awaited them, driver tipping his hat with, "You're," before Thomas cut him off with a sharp look. "You're," Eleanor prompted. "Your carriage is ready," the driver finished awkwardly. As they drove through increasingly impressive countryside, Eleanor's certainty solidified. This wasn't a business trip. This was a homecoming. Finally, they crested a hill, and Eleanor's breath stopped. Before them lay Thornfield Estate. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion. No, a palace. 3 stories of honey-coloured stone, wings extending like welcoming arms. Gardens that must span acres, even in their current wild state. Windows that caught the afternoon sun like diamonds. "This is what you're considering investing in?" Eleanor asked faintly. Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. "Yes." "Thomas, what is this place really?" "My family's estate," he admitted quietly. The carriage rolled through iron gates toward the grand entrance. Servants appeared, lining up formally. And then Mrs. Pemberton emerged from the main doors. The same Mrs. Pemberton who supposedly ran Thomas's London house. "Your Grace," she called out joyfully. "Welcome home! And this must be the new Duchess. Oh, how wonderful!" The world tilted. "Your Grace, Duchess." Eleanor's hands went numb. She turned slowly to Thomas, who'd gone pale. "Your Grace," she repeated, her voice barely audible over the blood rushing in her ears. "Eleanor, you're a duke." It wasn't a question. "I can explain." "You lied." She stumbled backward as the carriage stopped. "You lied about everything, the tradesman, the modest life, all of it. Lies." "Please, let me." But Eleanor was already fleeing, running toward the gardens before anyone could stop her. Behind her, she heard Thomas calling her name, but she didn't stop. She'd been such a fool. Such a stupid, naive fool. She'd married a duke. She was a duchess, and she had absolutely no idea who her husband really was. Eleanor ran until her lungs burned, and her fashionable boots, purchased with Thomas's money she now knew came from ducal coffers, pinched unbearably. She finally collapsed onto a stone bench hidden deep in the overgrown gardens, surrounded by roses that had gone wild in their neglect. She'd been so careful, so pragmatic. She'd entered this marriage with eyes open, expecting nothing, promising nothing. A simple transaction. Except somewhere between chess games and shared laughter and the way Thomas looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, it had stopped being simple, and he'd lied about everything. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face, feeling tears threaten. She wouldn't cry. Crying was weakness, and she'd learned long ago that weakness was a luxury poor, indebted, desperate women couldn't afford. But she wasn't poor anymore, was she? She was a duchess. The realization was so absurd she laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. "Eleanor," she jerked up. Thomas stood at the garden path's entrance, looking more wretched than she'd ever seen him. His hair was dishevelled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. His cravat was askew. Go away, she said, hating how her voice shook. I can't. Not until you hear me out. Hear you out? She stood, anger flooding through her. What possible explanation could justify this? You made me believe you were a tradesman, a widower of modest means. I thought, her voice cracked, I thought we were equals, both desperate in our own ways, both trapped. But you were never trapped, were you? You're a duke. You could have married anyone. I didn't want anyone. Thomas moved closer, his hands raised as if approaching a spooked horse. That's the point. Everyone I've ever known wanted the duke, the title, the fortune, the power. No one ever wanted Thomas. So you lied? Yes. He didn't flinch from the admission. I lied. And I'd do it again, because for the first time in my adult life, someone looked at me and saw a man. Not a title. Not a fortune to be exploited. Just me. Eleanor shook her head. You don't understand. I entered this marriage honestly. I told you exactly why I needed it. I laid bare my desperation and shame. But you've been performing this entire time. How can I trust anything you've said? How can I trust that any of it was real? It was real. Thomas's composure cracked, raw emotion bleeding through. Every word, every moment. Do you think I tell every woman about my first wife, about how she hated me? Do you think I laugh with just anyone, Eleanor? Or that I can't sleep because I lie awake wondering if you're awake too, just beyond that locked door between our rooms? The words hung in the air, intimate and desperate. The debts, Thomas continued, his voice rough. I paid them before I even knew your full name. That first day, after you left the solicitor's office, I had Peters investigate. Not because I wanted leverage, but because I wanted to help. By the time I proposed marriage, I'd already instructed my banker to settle your accounts. Eleanor's breath caught. Before the marriage? Before the proposal, I would have paid them regardless of your answer. Because watching that man proposition you, seeing the way you held your head high despite your desperation, he broke off, closing his eyes. I knew. In that moment, I knew you were someone extraordinary. Stop, Eleanor whispered. Please stop. I can't. You need to understand. My first marriage was arranged by my father. Victoria was beautiful, accomplished, perfectly bred for the role of Duchess. She was also miserable. She never wanted me, Thomas. She wanted the Duke of Greystone, the position, the jewels, the prestige. When she discovered the man was boring and serious and preferred dusty books to balls, she looked elsewhere for amusement. His voice grew rougher. The night she died, she was running away with her lover. The carriage overturned. Her paramour survived. She didn't. And everyone whispered that it was my fault, that I'd driven her to it with my inadequacy, my inability to be the husband a duchess deserved. Eleanor's anger wavered. The pain in his voice was too real, too raw to be performance. For 3 years I lived with that shame, Thomas continued. 3 years of being the pitied duke, the man who couldn't keep his wife faithful. And then I saw you, facing down your own shame with such dignity. And I thought, what if I could just be Thomas? What if I could find someone who'd want the man, not the mask? He moved closer, close enough that Eleanor could see the desperation in his grey eyes. I should have told you immediately. I know that. But I was selfish. Every day you looked at me like I was just a man, not a title. I couldn't bear to shatter that. Because with you, I finally felt free. Free, Eleanor repeated bitterly, while I felt trapped in a lie. You were never trapped. Thomas reached for her hands, and she let him take them, too exhausted to pull away. Everything I gave you, The house, the money, Clara's education, none of it had conditions. If you want to leave tomorrow, you can. The debts are paid. Your sister's fees are secured for life. You're free, Eleanor. You were always free. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a blade twisting. Don't you see, she whispered, I don't want to be free, not anymore. Thomas went very still. What? Eleanor looked up at him, tears finally spilling over. I was supposed to feel nothing. This was a transaction, but then you taught me chess and laughed at my stories and looked at me like I was worth something more than the debts I carried. And I started to feel... She broke off, unable to continue. To feel what? Thomas's voice was barely audible. Like maybe I could have something real. Someone real. The tears came faster. But it was all based on a lie. How can I trust it? How can I trust you? Thomas released her hands, and for a moment, Eleanor thought he'd walk away. Accept defeat. Instead, he dropped to his knees on the grass before her, looking up with such desperate honesty that her breath caught. You're right. I lied. But, Eleanor, I lied about my title, not my heart. Every moment between us was real. Every laugh, every conversation, every time I looked at you and felt my chest tighten. That was Thomas, not the Duke. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a familiar book. Her copy of Jane Eyre, the one she'd been reading in the library. I found this on your nightstand, he said. You've marked passages. This one about equals, about standing before God as equals, despite what society says. He looked up at her. That's what I wanted, Eleanor, to stand before you as an equal, not as a duke, not as your benefactor, but as a man who's terrified he's falling in love with his own wife and has no idea if she could ever feel the same. The world seemed to stop. What did you say? Eleanor breathed. I'm falling in love with you. Thomas's voice shook. I know I have no right. I know I've betrayed your trust. But I can't watch you walk away without telling you that every day with you has been the happiest of my life. That I lie awake imagining what it would be like if that door between our rooms stayed unlocked. That when you smile at me over breakfast, I forget I'm a duke and remember I'm just a man who desperately wants to deserve that smile. Eleanor's knees went weak. She sank onto the bench and Thomas remained kneeling before her, putting them at eye level. You were a prisoner too, she realised suddenly, of your title, just like I was a prisoner of debts. Yes, Thomas's eyes glistened. We were both trapped in different ways, both invisible. You were invisible because of shame. I was invisible behind privilege. But when we were together, we saw each other, Eleanor finished softly. They stared at each other as the sun dipped lower, painting the overgrown garden in shades of amber and rose. Eleanor's mind raced, fitting pieces together. His loneliness, his desperation for authenticity, his terrible, wonderful lie. I was angry, she said finally, because I was terrified. Thomas frowned. Of what? That this feeling I have, this ridiculous, impractical feeling, was based on someone who didn't exist. But you're right. The man I've been falling for is Thomas. The man who can't find his own kitchen, who laughs at my terrible jokes, who treats my sister like family and pays debts without being asked. She touched his face, feeling him tremble. The Duke is just a title. Thomas is the man I married. Eleanor, his voice broke. I don't care that you're a duke, she said firmly. I care that you lied, but I understand why. And if you promise, truly promise, no more lies, not even small ones, not even to protect me. She paused. Can we start again? Honestly, this time? Thomas caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. Eleanor Hartwell Ashford, Duchess of Greystone, though I'll call you simply Ellie if you prefer." His lips quirked despite the tears on his face. "May I court you properly? Honestly? As Thomas, Duke of Greystone, who happens to be hopelessly, completely in love with his wife." Eleanor's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. This Duke has certain charm, though the tradesman version was less intimidating. The Duke is a disaster who needs help running his estate because he's been neglecting it for years. Thomas rose, pulling her to her feet. "The Duke also can't stop thinking about how lovely you look when you read, or how you bite your lip when concentrating on chess, or how you smell like lavender and something uniquely you that drives him mad." "Thomas," Eleanor breathed. "No more lies," he promised, drawing her closer. "Starting with this truth. I've wanted to kiss you properly since the moment you told me I was a terrible liar. May I?" Instead of answering, Eleanor pulled him down, claiming his lips with hers. The kiss was nothing like their chaste wedding peck. It was desperate and real and perfect. Thomas's arms wrapped around her, holding her like she was precious, like she was wanted. Eleanor's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, drowning in sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "God help me. I love you so much." "I love you too," Eleanor admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "Even though you're a duke, even though you lied, even though you're terrible at lying and even worse at knowing where your kitchen is." Thomas laughed, the sound joyful and free. "Then we're perfectly matched. You're terrible at accepting help and even worse at recognizing your own worth." "We're both disasters," Eleanor agreed. "The best kind." He kissed her again, softer this time. "Come inside. Let me show you your home. Our home. All of it, honestly." Eleanor took his offered hand. "Will there be a scandal? A duke marrying so far beneath himself?" "There will be talk," Thomas admitted. "But, Eleanor, I've lived my life for society's approval. It brought me nothing but misery. If they disapprove of my magnificent, brilliant, sharp-tongued wife, that's their loss, not ours." As they walked back toward the great house, hand in hand, Eleanor felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the bright hope of possibility. She was a duchess. The thought no longer terrified her. She was loved. That thought made her feel invincible. 6 months later, Thornfield Estate blazed with light and music. Spring had transformed the gardens Eleanor had been carefully restoring, and tonight they hosted their first ball as Duke and Duchess of Greystone. Eleanor stood at the ballroom's edge, watching couples whirl across the floor. Her gown was sapphire silk, elegant but not ostentatious. She'd never be the typical duchess, and society had learned to accept that, or at least learned to gossip about it quietly enough that she didn't have to hear. Thomas appeared at her side, pressing a glass of champagne into her hand. "Overwhelmed yet?" "Surprisingly, no." Eleanor smiled up at him. "Though I may have insulted Lady Pemberton by discussing suffrage over dinner." "You insulted her by existing," Thomas said dryly. "The suffrage was simply icing." Eleanor laughed, the sound drawing several interested glances. She'd learned that society found her amusing, at least. The poor governess who'd snared a duke. The whispers had been vicious at first, but Thomas's obvious devotion had eventually silenced most critics. Clara appeared, breathless from dancing. At 19, she'd blossomed into a confident young woman, currently being courted by 2 suitors Thomas had thoroughly investigated and approved. "Ellie, this is magnificent! Everyone's talking about how you restored the rose gardens." "With significant help from the gardeners," Eleanor demurred. "Oh, don't be modest. Mr. Ashford, I mean, His Grace. Clara still struggled with her brother-in-law's title. Told everyone it was entirely your design. Thomas grinned, unrepentant. Because it was. An elderly faction duke approached, clearly intent on conversation. Eleanor steeled herself for judgment. Your Grace, he addressed Thomas, then turned to Eleanor. Duchess, I must ask, how did you two meet? There are many rumours. Eleanor and Thomas exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing in that look. It was very romantic, Eleanor said solemnly. He saved me from desperate circumstances. And she, Thomas added, eyes twinkling, saved me from a life of loneliness. It was a marriage of convenience, they said together, then couldn't help laughing. The Duke looked between them, confused. That seems contradictory. Not at all, Eleanor said. It was convenient that we fell in love. Spectacularly convenient, Thomas agreed, taking her hand. Would you dance with me, wife? I suppose I'm obligated, Eleanor teased, being your Duchess and all. Being my Duchess has nothing to do with it. I'm asking Eleanor. Her heart melted, as it did every time he reminded her that he saw her, not the title. They moved onto the dance floor and Thomas pulled her close, closer than was strictly proper. Eleanor didn't care. Happy? He murmured. Ridiculously so. She looked up at him. Though I sometimes miss the tradesman. He was less intimidating. The tradesman is right here, Thomas said softly, just wearing fancier clothes. And badly, Eleanor noted, straightening his cravat. You still can't dress yourself properly. That's why I have you. They danced in silence for a moment, surrounded by music and laughter and the life they'd built together. Thomas, Eleanor said quietly. Thank you for lying to me. He pulled back, eyebrows raised. Thank me for lying. If you told me the truth that first day, I would have refused. I would have been too proud, too afraid. Because of your lie, I got to know Thomas before I knew the Duke. And Thomas is the man I fell in love with. His eyes grew suspiciously bright. You have a terrible habit of making me emotional at public events. Good thing you married someone scandalous. Society expects us to be inappropriate. Thomas laughed and spun her, the music swelling around them. When the dance ended, he kept holding her hand, lifting it to his lips. I love you, Eleanor Ashford. Every stubborn, brilliant, beautiful part of you. I love you too, even the parts that can't find the kitchen. As they stood there, smiling at each other in the middle of the ballroom, Eleanor reflected on how far she'd come. 6 months ago, she'd been desperate, drowning in debt, invisible to society. Now, she was visible, but not because she was a duchess, because she was loved. And that, Eleanor thought as Thomas pulled her close for another dance, made all the difference.